I'll ask everyone to please be seated at this time. We want to welcome those of you who have joined us online, as well as everyone here present in the chapel this morning for the services of Mrs. Lorraine Bercoon. Just as a gentle reminder for those of you in the chapel, if you have a cell phone with you, please place in the silent mode or turn it off completely. That would be appreciated. Officiating this morning will be Rabbi Rennie Dickman.
And the child asked, "Tell me of life." And the sage answered, "Life, my child, is a mystery. We do not ask to be born, nor do we even understand the meaning of birth, of creation. We grow and we experience life's pleasures and pains. We love, and slowly, oh so slowly, we come to realize that we have become, that we are. At that moment, we humble ourselves before the mystery of life and quietly say, 'Though I knew not, I have been granted the most precious gift of all, the gift of life.' And the child asked, 'Tell me of death.' And the sage answered, 'Death, my child, is a mystery. It is the inevitable return of the gift of life, the gift which came free to us. We live as the trustee of that mysterious being, of that unexplainable becoming. Yes, you and I are but the trustees of life. We nurture it, we delight in it, we give of it to others, and at the appointed time, we return it from whence it came. The beauty, my child, is that what we are, what we have become, remains long after the gift has been returned. It remains as a precious keepsake with our loved ones who live on." We've come together this morning to give thanks for the life of Lorraine Bercoon, and it's good to be able to be together. We remember Norman and Lorraine, this beautiful pair of human beings, of righteous people who blessed our lives. According to Norman, in the autobiography that he wrote, he said that he married very well. He said that Lorraine was a quiet giant. He praised her intellect, her management skills, her commitment to both of their parents and to both of their families. Today we are here to give thanks. We are also here to offer comfort to all those who mourn the passing of this wonderful, selfless, kind-hearted woman. There are several relatives who have asked to speak about her today. Lorraine's cousin, Bizer Hertzberg, her sister, Lorraine's cousin, Ellie Hertzberg Medwin, another cousin, Gail Dorfman, Lorraine's son, Mark, whose words will be read by his wife, Rhonda, Lorraine's daughter-in-law, and Henry, Lorraine's beloved brother, who's here from Washington, D.C., and then Joan, Lorraine's daughter. So I'll call upon Bizer Hertzberg to speak some words. She's on Zoom, right? So we'll wait one moment for her to be on Zoom.
Thanks. Lorraine was my mother's first cousin, and we never lived in the same town. We traded visits a few times when I was growing up, but I really got to know Norm and Lorraine in the 1970s when I went to college at Michigan, and they were my home away from home, being close in Chicago. I would go there for Thanksgivings, and anytime we were driving through, we would stop, and they were always the ideal aunt and uncle. They were always so hospitable and welcoming, and supportive. They were never judgmental. They never quizzed me or criticized my clothing like my own parents, and they were just so warm. And that is what I really remember about them. I never really understood the Midwest. until about 7 years when I went to visit them 7 years ago. And Norm insisted on driving us to the restaurant, their favorite restaurant. And, he was known there, and we had this lovely meal. And finally, I realized that the reason that the Midwest is so important is because of the people you love there. Thank you.
Thank you. Call upon Ellie Hertzberg Medwin.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's just Hertzberg. My in-laws did not want me. That's okay. I started having these little panic attacks a couple months ago, and it took me a little while to figure out what they were about. I thought it was because of some things going on at work, but it wasn't. I realized it's because Lorraine is gone, because Lorraine was always a safe place. She was always somebody you could go to if you needed help. When I was in college and I was flying from New York State, I started flying from Buffalo to Seattle, and one time, for some reason, we couldn't land at O'Hare, so they diverted us to Flint, Michigan. And, oh, Joni remembers. Yes, and then they put us on a bus to Chicago, and I called Lorraine at some ungodly hour, collect, of course, and of course she accepted the call, and she came out at something like midnight to pick me up at O'Hare and take me home and give me a snack, which in those days was something along the lines of half a chicken and a can of corn. And I stayed at Lorraine's until I could get a flight to Seattle. And then, and it must have been 15 years later, and I was moving with my family from Colorado Springs to Syracuse. So I had to drive my 4-year-old, and it was just me and the 4-year-old. And, she would not help with the driving. So we had lots of way stops, and one of them was in Chicago. I always knew that I had a place to stay in Chicago when I needed it. When Gertie died, I always knew I had a place to stay in Chicago, and there was always somebody there to take care of me. And if something terrible happened any other time, there was always Lorraine to call. And so those little panic attacks are because the world just does not seem as safe as it did before when we still had Lorraine. So I will truly miss her, and I think we all will. Thank you.
Lorraine's cousin, Gail Dorfman.
Thank you. I cry easily, so they're happy tears if I, Joni knows. So in October 1924, my grandparents, Saul and Belrose, had a daughter, and they named her Lorraine. And 6 months later, Saul's brother Irving, and 3 months later, I think soon after, Irving and Sarah had a daughter, and they too named her Lorraine. And at the time, apparently, my grandfather was quite perturbed that they couldn't come up with their own name. But the two first cousins, both named Lorraine, ended up being fast friends for life. And when they married, the two couples were special friends forever, and our families have continued to be, seeing each other quite frequently when we both lived here in Chicago, and afterwards as often as possible in Columbus, in California, certainly in Nashville, It has been a very special relationship. I think of Lorraine every day when I get into my car because Norman and Lorraine came out to California as they did frequently in Januaries, and in January of 2001, they went with Mom and helped her buy this car. It is still running just fine, and we're trying to take very careful care of it. I also think of Lorraine whenever I make asparagus roll-ups. And I don't know if the story is true, but it goes like this. My mom would often make asparagus roll-ups when she had company, and everybody loved them, and she would say, I got the recipe from my cousin Lorraine. And then as I started cooking dinners for my family, I would make asparagus roll-ups, and I would say, I got the recipe from my mom, who got the recipe from her cousin Lorraine. And my kids are now making asparagus roll-ups, and they say, we got the recipe from Mom, who got it from Grandma, who got it from cousin Lorraine. And so if you want, and I think it will continue for many generations, and if you want to participate, you steam asparagus spears, you get some white bread, you cut off the crust, you flatten it with rollers, you mix an egg and Roquefort and cream cheese together, spread it on the bread, put the asparagus spear in the middle, roll it up, put a little bit of butter on it, and put it in the oven for 10 minutes. It's really yummy. About 3 years ago, my sister, brother, Amy, and David and I came to visit Chicago to see Lorraine and Norman because they were getting older, and spent a really spectacular, Brian was there as well, spent a spectacular afternoon with them, talking about multiple subjects from the war to politics to music to family. And actually, it was actually just Norman talking. And occasionally, Lorraine would kindly correct something that needed to be corrected. But as we left that day, we were just blown away at how amazingly vibrant and interested in everything in life they were well into their 90s. And we thought how special it was that they had each other for so long, and how lucky Joan and Mark were to have them as parents, and how fortunate our family was that we could stay so close over the years. And I think that will continue because I know that that's what the two Lorraine Roses would want. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll have to try the asparagus roll-ups. Thank you. Rhonda is in Atlanta and is going to read words written by Mark Bercoon.
So here we are again, 1 year, 3 months, and 16 days after my dad passed. My beloved and ever so caring mother passes. Mom lived 97 years and 19 days. I guess this shows that when health professionals tell us that the key to a long, healthy life is daily exercise and a well-balanced diet, it's nothing but gibberish. I never saw or heard of my mom exercising 1 minute in my lifetime, and she ate everything she wanted and enjoyed it immensely. She never swam 1 stroke nor walked 1 step unless it was to get her where she wanted to go and the car wouldn't fit. Whereas my dad suffered with high cholesterol and various heart conditions for the last 40 years of his life, I remember my mom coming home from a doctor's appointment to tell our family, quote, "The doctor said I have fat everywhere, but in my blood." But bless her, let us all be so lucky. Until the last 2 months or so of her life, my mom did not spend 1 night in a hospital since I was born and took virtually no medications. You all may not know this, but my mom was quite an amateur sports enthusiast. Why else would she have attended well over 100 Little League and high school baseball games and over 150 grade school and high school basketball games? I think she even suffered through a few high school soccer games, which I could hardly endure playing in. In fact, I do not recall my mom missing even one of my basketball games that was played within 25 miles of the house. I cannot imagine a more supportive mother, as she was always driving me and my friends to games and practices and never showed the slightest bit of annoyance or aggravation from the task. My mom's aggravation and annoyance was reserved for my inability to make my bed. But no need to worry. I mastered the skill by the time I married. So I guess if I had one criticism of my mom, it would be that she did not effectively communicate this bed making thing. Leading by example on this subject was a total failure on her part. I say this tongue in cheek, of course, but the point is valid. I cannot think of any other aspect of my mom I would want her to change. My mom loved our large extended family. She knew everyone's birthday, anniversary, etc. She was interested in what all of her and my dad's aunts, uncles, cousins, and their kids were doing. She felt for them through hard times and celebrated when they had good fortune. My mom never expressed a need for more than she had and was always happy and content with the life she and my dad made for our family. My mom never had a bad word to say to anyone because my mom's way was to say nothing to you if she was mad or upset with you. My mom had a great relationship with her brother, and I am thankful and grateful for my Uncle Henry, who I know was always there for both my parents, especially these last few years. From kindergarten through 8th grade, my mom made a point of being home every day when I came home from school. I never had a key to the house until high school. However, there was one day, probably around 4th grade, when I learned my mom was not perfect. I beat her home from school by about 10 minutes. I saw her turn the corner with my grandma Rose in tow. But of course, that was the day I really had to pee. I'll keep this G-rated, but the shame of it was, I really like those maroon bell-bottom pants. Enough said. My mom opened our house and her heart to every relative and friend passing through town, and they always stayed with us. She loved spending time and seeing her grandkids grow up. My folks spent a month per year in San Diego for many years with Evan and Nathan while Evan and Nathan were growing up, and they visited us in Atlanta regularly to spend time with Isabella, Olivia, and Shelby. My mom loved to laugh, and she had a great laugh. She couldn't tell a joke because she would start to laugh too hard to get through it, but she loved hearing a good joke. My mom set a great example for Joni on how to be a great mother, as Joni saw how my mom cared for her mother and how mom took care of Joni and me. Joan did a great job caring for mom, especially the last few years and since dad passed. I think the only thing Joni has messed up on is the no exercise thing mom preached. I want to thank my other sister, Sharona, whom my mom treated and subtly nagged like a daughter, as Sharona reciprocated my mom's care by visiting often and acted as a daughter to my mom. My wife, Rhonda, was exceptionally close to her mother, Marcia, who left us much too early in 2017. So it would be disrespectful to Marcia to say that Rhonda was like a daughter to my mom. It is also beyond weird to say that my wife is a pseudo sister of some kind. But Rhonda and my mom developed a very close and special relationship during our marriage that provided much love and support for both of them. I know my mom care deeply for Rhonda, and I know Rhonda will miss my mom and the closeness they shared for a very long time, if not forever. I also want to thank my cousin Ken Hoffman, who always reached out to help any way he could with both my mom and dad. My mom always seemed like a fourth sister to Ken's mother, Dina, and her sisters, Mitzi and Gertie, who left us much too early. I'm very sad that my mom has passed, but I take comfort in knowing that she lived her life with very little discomfort or pain. None of us lives forever, but Mom did it right. Her and my dad were happy together for 67 years, and Mom adjusted well to her life after Dad. Cousins Ben and Ronnie visited Mom when Mom felt up to it, and I know my mom enjoyed these visits. I want to thank Agnes for her care and devotion to my parents over the last several years, and I want to thank the many caregivers that helped make the last couple of years of my parents' lives easier and more comfortable. It feels funny to me to refer to Mom throughout this eulogy as Mom, because to me, she was always Mom. So in closing, goodbye, Mom. I'm so glad I had you for as long as I did, and I will miss you for all the days in my life. Your son, Marky, as she called me.
Please keep going.
Thank you. I will deeply miss Lorraine. After knowing her for 25 years, she became a mother to me, and I a daughter to her. I used to call her almost every day at 4 p.m. when Norman was sometimes napping, and we would have our, quote, lady chats. She loved sharing recipes, talking about politics, worldly events, and a myriad of other topics. As her mobility declined, she looked forward to our calls as a diversion and distraction from the mundane, especially after Norman passed away. She always had a loving, supportive, kind, and generous heart. She was always interested in hearing about her granddaughters and all the stories I shared that we would laugh about together. After 20 plus years, she easily transitioned to me ending every call with, I love you, and her saying, I love you too. I have deep admiration and fond memories of her as a wonderful, devoted wife, mother, grandmother, mother-in-law, friend, and person. She lived a good, long life, and yes, she did it right. Lorraine, you are forever in our hearts and will be missed. I love you, Rhonda.
Thank you, Rhonda. I'm going to call upon Lorraine's brother, Henry, and his son, Johnny.
My memories of Lorraine go back to the earliest years. And one of the earlier speakers reminded me of one item, is that Lorraine had a middle name named Martha. Lorraine Martha Rose was her name. And she got that name, but when I was born, I don't have a middle name at all. But the reason that she has a middle name is that she was born on Washington's birthday, and the doctor thought she ought to be named Martha. Lorraine was, many of my memories with Lorraine go back to the earliest days. She was always helpful to me and my parents. And when I started kindergarten in Olean, New York, where we lived at that time. Olean, by the way, is a town about 70 miles south of Buffalo, New York, still in New York State. And it's had a population of about 80,000, of which about 35 families were Jewish. And when I started kindergarten in Olean, she had the responsibility to guide me to school. And she was only 8 years old at that time. I was 6. She had the responsibility because my parents had an Army-Navy surplus store, and they had no help, so they had to man it themselves. And so a lot of the activity at home was with Lorraine and myself alone. In the morning, when Lorraine and I would meet in front of the store, and my father would guide us across one of the 2 main streets in that town. He would, and then Lorraine would walk me to school, and after school, she would wait for me, and so that she would guide me back. In Olean, we lived in a very nice house on 7th Street, which was about 3 blocks from the store that my father had at that time. And I say my father, it was my mother too, because they were the only people there were no employees. And obviously, I've made some notes, and I'm skipping a lot of materials for you. I remember when we moved after I was 7 years old to Buffalo, New York, and I can remember that Lorraine and I shared the burden of having a garden in the backyard, and one of the primary goals of that garden was to grow tomatoes. I don't know why, but it turned out to be one of our favorite items to eat. And in fact, we grew so many tomatoes that we would hide them or store them in the basement while they were green, and we'd eat them all winter. And talking about eating, Lorraine had a very wide variety of items that she would eat, which was in contrast to me. There were a number of things that I just wouldn't touch. My mother would make special things for me to eat. And when I was in the Navy, she was afraid that I would starve to death. And so when I was in boot camp, I would receive a package every Saturday. We only got mail on Saturdays in boot camp. And every Saturday there was a package for me of food. And I couldn't, obviously in the Navy, as you may know, you have very little space for all of your gear, and there's no place to store anything. So I had to share it, and we ate with my friends every Saturday, a big meal. I couldn't convince her not to send it. She did it throughout all boot camp. As you probably know, Lorraine did not go to college immediately after high school. She worked at the Chevrolet plant as an inspector. This was during the war, and they were hiring people that they might not otherwise hire. So this was in 1942 that she graduated from high school. And so there was a reason that she got that job is that my father was working at Chevrolet at that time too, and they would go to work together for 2 years. The other reason that she was working is because they didn't have enough money to send her to college. And she worked and saved in 2 years enough money to go to college at the University of Buffalo, living at home. I went to the University of Buffalo also after serving in the Navy. And so we were at the university at the same time for at least a year. And she was very helpful to me. They had a student government, and I ran for office in that student government. And she was very helpful, but she got all of her senior friends to vote for me, and besides the other people that might otherwise do so. And incidentally, it was old-fashioned at that time that the fraternities and sororities dominated student government, and there was no way to get nominated except by a committee that they controlled. And so my nomination wasn't even on the ballot. And as a result of her efforts and some others, I got more votes than anybody else. Of course, the result was I was one person on the council, and I couldn't do anything anyway. I mean, at the university, of course, we were in different classes and had different friends. So we had limited contact there. She taught after she graduated at a high school in Buffalo called Riverside High School. And during her first year there, she participated, well, I shouldn't say participated, I don't know what she did with it, but there was a teacher's strike. I think it was the first one in Buffalo's history. And it was a successful one. She taught business classes there. She also knew how to type, which I did not. And when I was in college, and we were both living at home, by the way, during college, for her and for myself. But during my college career, I had to, as many of us do, write papers, and she did all of the typing because I never learned how to type. Later in my career, of course, I had a typist, and when I left, and I was in the government, I left government, I didn't have a secretary, I really was in trouble. After I finished college and law school, I moved around a lot. In fact, during the decade following that event, I think I lived in about 8 different cities. And unfortunately, that was during the period that my parents had difficulties, and Lorraine really was in the best to help them, and she did. She spent a lot of her efforts in that regard. And ultimately, in that period, they moved to Chicago to live with her. The house that they finally lived in, the one that she just left, they lived in for practically all of their lives. Toward the end, when she was not as able, the thought was that she should move into some place where she would have constant help, but she absolutely refused. She wanted to stay in that house. My last conversation with Lorraine was on the telephone and the computer. And I think somebody had a picture of that here. She was still quite conscious of what was happening, but was not very vocal. But she recognized Andrea, my daughter, and her children. They could see it on a screen during the telephone conversation. And I think Johnny also joined in, and she even mentioned his name and smiled. I really can't remember having an argument with Lorraine. Maybe it happened, but I have no recollection of any such thing happening, and she was always helpful. And it's a big loss to me. Thank you.
Thank you. May you find comfort in the days ahead. May her memory always be a blessing for you. Joan.
Well, I want to welcome everybody and good morning and thank you for being here. Like Rini said, it was just a large contrast from my dad's service where we were just 10 in this huge room. And it's so nice to have people here. There are several people here from out of town, okay? East Coast, West Coast, and not just my boys. So it's really very special. My dad had reviewed his wishes for his service with me, some years ago. So when he passed, my mom even asked me, do you know if he wanted a service? And I said, well, yeah, don't you know? He's got pages and pages of instructions and suggestions, and she had no idea. So I'm like, yeah, we're gonna do something. So he had also informed me that my mom's request was that there be no service for her. But, as he told me, well, if she passed first, I could do whatever I want. So, I'm doing, I think, what he would have wanted. My mom and dad were extremely generous and thoughtful to everyone they knew, as you've already heard. They kept in touch with relatives near and far, and most of their friends they acquired throughout the years. The Bercoon Hotel always made room for visitors from out of town. No one was ever turned away. Their home was always open to friends of mine and Mark's, too. We didn't have to even ask to have friends over usually. They were just welcome. My parents also included Mark and I at dinners that they would host for some of my dad's clients and their friends. We never had a kids' table. So we were really introduced to a lot of interesting people, conversations pretty early in our life, and I don't think we ever forgot that. We learned a lot early on about so many topics that way. The kitchen was always open to Mark and I as soon as we were old enough to cook safely. And as you heard, Mark would eat everything and eat too fast. And I was very picky and slow. That really frustrated my mom. She was very embarrassed to order plain spaghetti at a restaurant for me, okay? And when I had plain spaghetti at home, she would make sure I had some meat on the side, because I wouldn't eat her meat sauce for many years. I didn't eat any sauces. I had a different plate for everything, so it wouldn't leak on anything else on my plate. My parents were trusting. Mark and I could drive nearly everywhere we needed to go once we had our driver's licenses. My dad would take the time to drive with us several days before we needed to go somewhere to make sure we knew the safest way to get there. And there were no cell phones then, okay? Yeah. I would also ride my bike all over the place and make sure I had change. And I did have to call my mom one day when I had a flat tire. Please rescue me. And she always did, as you always heard. She was there for everybody, not just Mark and I. We knew, both Mark and I knew we had wonderful parents, but I don't know if we ever knew how great they would be as grandparents. As you heard, they really made an attempt to know their grandchildren, even though they lived far away. They traveled, made several trips to California, Atlanta. You know, my mom and dad would drive to Atlanta, take 2 days, have their route, listen to their operas and whatever, and they kept doing that, I think, till my dad was about 88. And I showed him how cheap it was to fly at that time. And he was like, oh, yeah, I don't want to drive anymore. And so we were both very relieved at that point. My mom remained, as you heard, she kept very close ties with her brother Henry and many of her first cousins. You would think the female cousins were all sisters. They were so close. They grew up together, and family was everything. So Mark and I got to know many cousins, extended family, very well. And I think we realized how important it was to not just be a family unit, but be an extended family and welcome in people that we knew, and friends, family, whoever, that really had an impact on us. I want to thank everybody from out of town and everybody else here for being here. And those of you who visited my parents in later years and kept an eye on them, I thank you also. They loved having company. They cherished their friendships with all of you. Their house will soon be occupied by their devoted home assistant, Agnes, and her 2 children, who I know will continue the tradition of frequent hosting family and friends. Agnes has been my savior over the last few months, helping me clean and sort through nearly everything in the house. Agnes, my parents loved you, and they were so happy that you wanted to buy their home. Agnes is on Zoom with an old friend of theirs now watching. So there are so many people to thank for helping out while I lived in San Diego. cousins Sharona, Ken, Ben, and Ronnie, neighbor Mary. You always looked in on them when I asked you to, and even then some. I'm very, very grateful for all of you. And her caregivers were amazing. Thank you, Edna, Lily, Mimi, and Faye. I know my mom didn't always seem appreciative of your care, but I really think she was, and she knew you were there for her. You also made my life much easier, and I'm so grateful for all of you. You are phenomenal. Anyway, I want to thank Chicago Jewish Funerals for helping organize this and my dad's service, and they were all just very helpful. I need to thank Ben for helping me with the videos, the pictures, and everything. So, and that's all. Thank you, Rabbi Rini, for stepping up to the plate once more. And anyway, and thank you for being here. My mom had another recipe that was famous in the family, and that was her Kugel recipe. And she made sure and made a Kugel every time Henry was coming to visit. And so I have printed up, before you leave here today, I have printed out copies of her Kugel recipe with a picture of both my parents that you can take with you, okay? And even Mark said, make sure and get Mom's Kugel recipe. So he liked it too. Anyway, thank you again, and Rini? Okay.
Our rabbis taught that there are 3 crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of royalty. But they emphasize that the crown of a good name excels them all. The book of Ecclesiastes says, Tov Shem Mishemen Tov. A good name is to be treasured above precious oil. Wealth, health, even life passes away, but a good name lives forever. It is this view that the Talmud teaches. Monuments need not be erected for the righteous. Their deeds are their memorials. They will be remembered and revered for the kindness they have shown and for the love they have given. They are shining examples of what it means to be a righteous person. I want to fill in a few more details about our remarkable Lorraine. And thank you to Shelby Bercoon, her granddaughter, who wrote a detailed biography of her grandmother, which I recommend highly. She was born, as we heard, on February 22nd, 1925, in Olean, New York, to Irving and Sarah Rose. She was named for Irving's father, Louis, and as we heard from Henry, her middle name, Martha, was to honor Martha Washington, because February 22nd is also George Washington's birthday. Her most memorable childhood experience was a trip she took with her family to New York City when she was 8 or 9. During her visit, she saw the Statue of Liberty, relatives she had never met, Radio City Music Hall, and many other exciting attractions. In her free time, Lorraine made scrapbooks of celebrities with her friends, and she played with paper dolls. She loved school. Her favorite subject was social studies because she loved to learn how the world became the way it is today. She was a great student. She never got in trouble, and she made the honor roll many times. When her class put on the play Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, Lorraine played the role of a dancer. I'm just imagining that. While she was in school, Lorraine's family moved to Buffalo, where she met her best friend, Rose Goldsand. Walking to school, Lorraine and Rose skipped on what they imagined was the yellow brick road because they both loved The Wizard of Oz. She made several lifelong friends in Buffalo and developed close ties with many cousins who lived there. She worked as a bookkeeper after graduation to earn money to go to college and was an inspector in a Chevrolet airplane parts factory during the war. At age 19, she began the University of Buffalo, where she graduated with a degree in business education in 1947. Lorraine taught business subjects at Riverside High School in Buffalo. Norman and Lorraine actually met in 1940 when Lorraine was 15 and Norman was 16. But they were introduced again in 1951 by a mutual friend from Olean named Izzy Earle. In 1953, they married and moved to Chicago. Here, Lorraine taught at Moser Secretarial School until Joan was born, and then Mark. She was an encouraging, attentive, and trusting mother to them. She spent a lot of time driving them to ballet, swimming, piano, and attending many sports events, as Mark wrote. For many years, Lorraine stayed home to care for them and also for her own parents. She volunteered for the PTA, Independent Voters of Illinois, the National Council of Jewish Women, and Women's American Ort. She was a devoted volunteer manager of the Ort thrift shop in Evanston for many years, which eventually became a very profitable asset for the organization. Over the years, Lorraine stepped up as an attentive caretaker for her parents, her mother-in-law, Sarah Bercoon, and her sister-in-law, Ruth Dryman. With Norman, Joan, and Mark, she enjoyed yearly summer vacations, including one very memorable trip to England and France. Norman and Lorraine subscribed to many seasons at the Chicago Symphony and the Lyric Opera. They enjoyed dinners, plays, movies, and the visual arts, especially when accompanied by their numerous friends throughout the years. They also traveled to Alaska, Mexico, Canada, Scotland, Italy, and numerous destinations in the States. Once Lorraine became a grandmother, her entire world widened as she and Norman frequently visited Nathan and Evan in San Diego and Isabella, Olivia, and Shelby in Atlanta. All 5 grandchildren have wonderful memories of her calm, caring, and loving interactions with them. Lorraine was a caretaker, always eager to help. She was extremely intelligent, active, always there for everyone who needed her, and she often anticipated those needs. There is so much more to say about this righteous woman, whom we will remember forever. I will end with a quote from Shelby's biography of Lorraine. She wrote, "One thing that I have learned from Lorraine is that you should always try your hardest. Do your best. Even though you may not be the best at everything, you should try. I love her so much." I offer this reading before we rise for the mourner's Kaddish. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember her. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we will remember her. In the opening of buds and the rebirth of spring, we will remember her. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of the sun, we will remember her. In the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we will remember her. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we will remember her. When we are weary and in need of strength, we will remember her. When we are lost and sick at heart, we will remember her. When we have joys we yearn to share, we will remember her. So long as we live, she too shall live, for she is now a part of us as we remember her. Please rise for the mourner's Kaddish, which is on the back of your pamphlet. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala u'vizman kari v'imru. Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach leolam olomei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudsha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran bi'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehi shlama Rabbah min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Osei shalom b'mromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. May the one who makes peace in the heavens cause peace to descend upon her, upon our family, upon Israel and all the world. And together we say, Amen. Please be seated. May Lorraine's blessing be a memory, and may we honor her legacy by caring for each other the way she cared so much for all of us. Amen.
Thank you to Rabbi Rini Dickman and to all the wonderful speakers here this morning. Shiva will be held in our other North Chapel until 2 p.m. today. And as you enter the Shiva room, you will be handed the envelope with that beautiful photo of Lorraine and Norman, as well as a copy of Lorraine's Pineapple Kugel. Okay. This concludes the service. Thank you.